So Diablo 4 has been getting some pretty massive overhauls in its recent seasons. Overhauls to itemization, to difficulty, to how gearing works, to pretty much every part of the game. We've gotten some pretty massive changes, some of the biggest ones being the introduction of endgame crafting with the tempering and masterworking systems. But I think one big thing Diablo 4 is still missing that would massively increase the build possibilities is changing the elemental damage of different skills in the game. So let's say changing the Hydra skill from a fire skill to a lightning skill, or any other number of skills that do an elemental damage type and being able to change them to a different element. And while we don't have any official announcements that we're getting this in any future seasons, I think there's a pretty good chance that we will be getting this at some point in the future. And we do also have a clip from a previous developer live stream around the time of season 4 that the developers kind of hit at this being in the cards for the future.
It's from Matt LOL. Is tempering going to allow changes for the skills, the skill type, like maybe lightning hydras or maybe changes to Blizzard where it's a rain of fire or something like that?
That's pretty cool.
Honestly, anything an Apex can do.
Yeah.
It is open season of things we could potentially do in the future, yeah. Not in season 4, but, you know, possibly in the future.
And just the way the developers reacted to that question just makes me think that it's something that they have been working on or that they have plans to do. Because also keep in mind, this was around the time that we were getting the tempering system and their masterworking systems actually fully revealed, and they were pretty close to being introduced into the game. And the tempering system is actually the best way I think they could start to introduce the ability to change the elements of different skills. And I think there's two reasons for this. First off, the tempering system is already really good at allowing you to further customize your gear to fill in holes of your builds or add different effects to your builds that you may want. But while that's the case, a lot of gear that you're tempering on, you're kind of tempering basic effects on or basic stat increases, and you don't actually have a ton of additional options. Like if I go to one of my builds from season 6, if I go look on my gloves, I just had Earth Critical Strike chance and Petrify duration. If I go on my legs, I had total armor and petrify duration. If I go on my weapon, where a lot of the more interesting effects are, you have a chance for landslide projectiles to be cast twice, which is also a pretty big part of this because the chance for projectiles to cast twice was actually a pretty big introduction into the game, and those came through tempering. But then on my weapon, I also just had Earth Critical Strike chance, and then on my necklace, I just had Earth Critical Strike chance and more max life. A majority of those temperings were just stat increases. Now, I don't want any of the things I just went over to be removed, especially because the tempering system now is very easy to expand, because pretty much every tempering category now just has 3 different stats that you choose between. They can very easily just add other categories with 3 other effects that change the element of one of your abilities or something like that. But to take it back to a lot of these temperings being pretty basic stat increases, that's also why adding the option to change the element of a skill through tempering is good, because right now a bunch of our temperings are just these base stat increases. Could be changed to something much more interesting, or adding the options to make them something much more interesting, because you still want the ability to have crit chance increases or armor increases to fill in the holes of your build, but adding much more interesting options like changing the element of a skill is just a good thing. And I'm sure most of you who have played Diablo 4, especially into the endgame, realize how many new build possibilities would open up if you could change the element of a skill. Like, let's go to Druid and use Landslide. It's a core skill that's nature magic and an earth skill. And let's say I could change it to being a poison skill instead of an earth skill. That just adds a massive amount of additional possibilities to that skill and additional ways to be able to scale the damage of Landslide. And just being able to change that for any of the classes or any of the skills would be completely massive. Obviously, going to something like the Sorcerer would have some of the most obvious ones. Like, you could change a frost skill to being a fire skill that would change the different elements of what that skill actually does. Like, maybe you could have Frost Nova be a fire nova below you instead of freezing enemies. Maybe it does some other type of CC. Maybe it catches everything on fire and knocks them over or stuns them or something. And then because it's doing fire damage, it can work with a bunch of other passives and a bunch of other effects, maybe even a bunch of new uniques. So just being able to change the element of like a singular skill could add a ton of additional possibilities. And then imagine being able to change a ton of different skills. You could have one build using the exact same skills, and you could just be able to change the element of all those skills and have a completely different build with completely different effects and power just by changing their elements that could be added primarily through the tempering system. And Diablo 4 does seem to be getting some changes to the tagging system with Season 7, because if you don't know how this works, if you look on any skill in Diablo 4, all of the different things that consist of that skill, so it could be defensive and frost, those are the tags, and that's how that skill interacts and hooks into other effects and skills. But with Season 7, they're completely changing how the minion tag works, so it's just going to be much more easy to slot in minion skills to different builds and scale them in different ways. So it does seem that the developers are still updating the tag system, and being able to change the elements of skills, which would be changing the tags on the skills, would be another pretty massive addition or change to that system. And we do already have some amount of being able to change elements on skills or add elements to skills, especially when you go and look at something like the Spiritborn. That's pretty much what that class is completely built around, adding all the different tags to all your different skills. Some of their skills you can just add every tag to. It can get pretty crazy. And then you have some other effects through the other classes, just a very small amount. But if you keep adding more of those possibilities, you can get some really crazy stuff. And not only changing the element or the tag of that skill, but just adding new additions to it. Like you could, for instance, change a fireball to be like a frost ball instead, to where it changes the element, so it would change all the different effects and debuffs it could put on enemies, to where it could work with a bunch of other skills. And then you could also have all the different uniques and everything that work with fireball normally. So now you could throw out like a dozen frost balls instead of fireballs. But also imagine the ability to add another element to that skill. So let's say you have fireball, now you add frost to that fireball. Now it has the frost and fire tags, and it could be like a frost fireball now. And it can now have both of those elements and interact with tons of different elements and effects from both fire and frost. Now being able to do that would need to be much harder and much more limited, because you wouldn't just want to be able to just add like every element to one thing, but have it be a big investment to add an additional element to a skill, to now have a skill be multiple elements. That could open up even more build opportunities, and that one could get really crazy depending on what it is. And if they want to get really crazy with it, they could just allow you to add multiple new elements or tags to the skill if you want to invest that heavily into it. So now you could have a fireball, then you could add a frost tag to it, then you could add like a lightning tag to it as well. Now it has 3 different elements. That's getting really crazy, but just the amount of possibilities that would open up if they would allow us to change the element on skills or even add more elements to them. And outside of the changes they're making at Season 7 to the summon tag, they're also adding in a bunch of new tags for the new Season 7 powers. We're going to have things like Eldritch and Growth of Decay and Lost powers, and those are going to be tags that are on the actual powers for the season. So they may also be testing ways in which they can add new tags easily onto skills and augment them in different ways, and how easy it would be to add them in, because we're getting all these new skills with Season 7 that are part of the specific Season 7 powers, but all of these new skills work in basically the same way our class skills work. They have a certain amount of tags on them, that they will be affected by other things, and they could have interactions with other effects in this season that also have those tags, or have other tags, or get buffs or increased damage or something based upon those tags. So this could also be a different type of test into that. So for me personally, this is one of the biggest and most exciting changes the developers of Diablo 4 can make going into Season 8 and beyond, allowing us to change or add new elements onto skills. This just adds a ridiculous amount of new build possibilities and depth to the game. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.